Taylor, hi.
Yes, hey.
What's up, guys?
Hey, Taylor.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah. Maybe a little bit quiet, but I don't know.
Let me turn it up.
Yeah.
What about, is it getting louder?
Yeah, that
nice.
sounds good.
Thank
you. Better?
Yeah, perfect.
All
Taylor,
right,
how are
what's
you?
Up?
Yeah,
I'm good.
we're having a great
Good.
day here. And I noticed that Laravel released Nightwatch yesterday evening, or I don't know about
Yeah,
Because that's
last
full-time
night.
Australia?
Last night in the U.S. But yeah, I guess in the middle of very early in the morning, maybe for Europe.
Was it like a marketing thing to do it during the night because it's Nightwatch?
I'll say yes, but
Okay.
the reality is Nightwatch was built primarily by our APAC team in Australia and Japan. So for them, they were launching in the morning, which was kind of the best time they could be around to monitor everything. But we did try to spin it into a little bit of a opportune marketing moment.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. I was scrolling through the website today. It looks really nice, to be honest.
Thanks. Appreciate
It's clear that
it's been
you've put a lot
big
of
project.
Yeah, you've put a lot of time and effort into it, right?
I think that's something I generally really appreciate about Laravel, like the effort that you put into design and like how much that matters to the people that end up using your software. I'd love to hear a few words from you on that.
Yeah, I mean, good design has always been something that has been personally inspiring to me from the very beginning. I remember just being like awestruck watching the old days of like Jonathan Ive and Steve Jobs presenting like the new iPhone or something. And it was just like so magical and like awe-inspiring. And it left such a big impact on me. So design has always played a pivotal role in everything we do at Laravel. And thankfully, we have full-time designers at the company now, which are awesome. We didn't always have that in the history of Laravel. It was sort of trying to beg and plead for designers to help us in their free time. But now we have a great design team, and yeah, they really knock it out of the park with a lot of the work they do.
Yeah, it's great to see that and to kind of see like how well, at least from my perspective, the marketing around the Laravel brand works. And I think a part of that is that you're pushing PHP forward with it, right? Like that's my perception of it. But I think that leads me a bit to the question of like, do you have a vision for PHP as a part of what you're doing with Laravel? Like, how does this link together? And like, how do you think about that a lot? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think PHP is it's a really simple language to learn. It's really fast to get started. It's very easy to run. So I think it's actually a super productive stack for someone to get into if they want to get into web development. Playing off the last talk with AI, PHP's been around a long time, which is why we're here, right? For 30 years of PHP. So LLMs are very good at writing PHP because there's so much PHP out there in the world. And they're good at writing mature PHP frameworks like Laravel and Symphony and others. So I think PHP is still a great choice for full stack web development. I think paired with like a modern PHP framework is the most productive stack you can actually choose for full stack web development, which is amazing 30 years later. So I'm still very bullish on PHP in general. And I think more teams would do well to choose it more often if you're starting a new company or a new startup.
Some words of wisdom there.
Oh, yeah.
What actually, I'm curious, Taylor, like, what was the reason you chose PHP? Because if I remember correctly, you were in the .NET community, right?
Yeah, that's true. So, I graduated from Arkansas Tech University in 2008, and I immediately was hired by an enterprise trucking company here in the U.S., publicly traded company, lots of programmers. And I was an enterprise.NET and COBOL developer. So yeah, you're right. I did start on .NET and classic ASP and a lot of COBOL as well. And I just always had like side project ideas, side business ideas. And back then, I'm sure it's much easier now, but back then hosting .NET for your side project just wasn't the easiest thing in the world, right? You had to buy Visual Studio, you had to figure out what you were going to pay for to run your .NET application. It just wasn't super easy. Mm-hmm. And of course, PHP has always been easy to host, to throw up on a shared host. It was everywhere at the time on GoDaddy and DreamHost and all of the kind of shared hosting platforms back at that time. And so I had used PHP a little bit in college for an assignment, actually, and knew that it was like very easy to code. It was very easy to understand. The documentation was good. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll just go back to that and give it a shot. And, started building my side project ideas. And like every good PHP programmer realized, I need to build a framework for creating these ideas, of course. Worked on that for probably between like 6 and 8 months before, what became Laravel came out of that. But honestly, Laravel was never I didn't set out with the intention to create a framework. I was always really just trying to create a business so that I could work from home and have freedom and whatever else the goals were. But Laravel kind of became the business in this meta kind of way.
Yeah, like I've always thought that you were like the most genius programmer marketing out there because like you managed to like just not only build your own product but also the framework that runs the product, and it sounds like the dream, honestly, for many PHP developers.
I've always seen it kind of like not genius, but I'm a very average programmer that creates solutions for average developers, and that I think is what struck a chord, And I think also just having a low pain tolerance. At the very beginning, when I first created Laravel, anything I tried to like really make my experience smooth, and having a very low threshold for what was considered annoying, I think it made Laravel, it was a breath of fresh air for a lot of developers at the time.
So Laravel is now, if my count is correct, 14 years old. Is that,
yeah, that is correct. 2011 was the public release of Laravel.
So also kind of like half of PHP, right? That's kind of, again, like an impressive number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, last week would be the 14th anniversary, I think, of Laravel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you've seen like PHP and the ecosystem evolve quite a bit, right? What are some of the things that stand out to you?
Oh gosh, Laravel came into PHP at a very opportune moment in history, and that was PHP 5.3, which I think, maybe I'm biased because that's when I came into PHP, but for me, it marks a very modern turning point in PHP because we got namespaces, we got anonymous functions, late static binding was in PHP 5.3, which made Eloquent possible. Even just the API of Eloquent was not fully possible before that feature. And then PHP 5.4 brought traits, which have been used fairly extensively in Laravel, I would say, in various packages. So it came into PHP at a very interesting moment. I think it also came in when a lot of the frameworks that had come before were built not with those features in mind. And Laravel was just kind of at the right place at the right time to maybe utilize and capitalize on some of that new stuff that was coming to PHP. But yeah, I've seen PHP come a long way, but also I was not there for so many of the, let's say older period of PHP, PHP 3, PHP 4. I have no experience with that, which is always, so funny. So I almost feel lucky that I really walked into PHP in a very modern iteration of the language.
Right, I kind of feel the same way. I don't I've never experienced the pain days. No. One of the questions we got on Discord here is, Laravel has been going for 14 years now. What are some of the areas of the framework that you feel the writer says might have been neglected, but that might be too strong of a word here, but might, need a little bit of love? Are there some parts of the framework that you're like,
The things that come to mind would be more like UI related. So like we have packages like Laravel Horizon and Telescope, and anything you put a UI on, after a couple of years, like people start to feel like it's dated. It just doesn't matter if it is or not, but people want to see that UI changing. So I think I've got it on our list to give those a little bit of a facelift this year. But as far as like the core framework functionality, I still work on that for several hours a day. Even 14 years later, I still merge all the pull requests. So, it's still just like my passion, and that's what I'm That's what I love to do. So most of that stays fairly well maintained, I would like to think. But those UIs, we got to stay on top of them. People always want the fresh bells and whistles on those things.
But is that something that's changed for you over time? Because you say you're still, you're doing all of that by yourself. But obviously the thing has grown. There are a lot more different parts of it. So isn't there kind of naturally a shift to do more maintenance and less kind of new and fun things? But then at the flip side, I do see that you managed to accomplish that somehow.
Yes. There's been so many times in Laravel's history where I've been like, I'm out of ideas. We've done everything that I could think of to do, whether it was open source features or Forge or Envoy or Vapor and all of that. And it was like, there's been times I remember, this was particularly during COVID. I think I was like, I'm out, I don't have any more ideas for Laravel. And then a month later, Laravel Octane came to mind, which, became a different way to run Laravel apps using Franken PHP and Swool and others. So I just tend to operate with a little bit of faith that ideas will surface, over time, when it's the right time, the ideas, either through community feedback or through talking to people that are using the framework or through our own needs, it just seems to happen that stuff shows up that is an interesting problem to solve. But yes, there have been times where I thought I was out of ideas. And I think you're correct that over time, the framework itself, all the low-hanging fruit is sort of solved, right? So you kind of get into more and more niche cases or edge cases or more enterprise or complex cases. But you're right that you do eventually run out of just the most obvious improvements.
Some people on Discord here are asking about a different aspect of Laravel, because there's Laravel the framework, but these days Laravel is a lot more than the framework. There are a lot of products that you're making with the whole team now, and I've noticed a couple of similar questions that I wanted to touch on. There are some projects with overlap these days, what was mentioned here, Forge and Envoy, but also so Vapor and Cloud and stuff like that. What's your, if we can ask, I don't know if you can answer at this point, but we feel free enough to ask, what's the long-term vision for these projects that do quite have a lot of overlap with each other?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a lot of it is, just a historical artifact of how Laravel, the company, was built. And for 10 years, it was a solo bootstrapped company with a relatively small team. And a lot of the things we tackled were just trying to solve the next logical problem that we saw. So Forge was, the first major product that we ever released, and made it super easy to spin up servers for running Laravel apps. And then later we created Envoy deployment, and then Vapor for serverless deployment, and now of course Cloud and Nightwatch. Cloud being fully managed deployments, so where we are actually the ones running the servers behind the scenes, and then Nightwatch, a fully managed performance monitoring observability tool. I think we are going to try to consolidate some of these feature sets, particularly with Forge and Envoy. I think we'll have more to say about this at Laracon this summer, but we would like to bring a lot of the functionality from Envoy into Forge. Those two products a little bit, bring zero downtime deployments into Forge is something we're very interested in. People have wanted that for a long time. I think with Vapor, it's a little bit of an interesting product. I was personally interested in serverless compute and Lambda throughout 2019. I started working on Vapor as sort of an experiment or proof of concept. Really liked the aspect of I don't have to think about servers, part of serverless. I wasn't as interested in there's a lot of people that debate what serverless means, but for me it meant I don't want to ever think about a server and scaling them. And the true culmination of that vision, I think, is really more fully realized in Cloud, which is the same end goal of I don't want to think about servers, but without the needing to log into the AWS dashboard and deal with IAM or Lambda or VPCs or anything like that, which you still kind of have to know about when you're using Vapor. So, these days I would point people to either Cloud or Forge for hosting your Laravel product, and that really depends on if you want to be fully managed or self-managed, and then Nightwatch for observing that product. That's kind of my happy path for what Laravel developers should do.
I mean, I think as you're talking about these different products and the parts you've had on that, and like how you've built this business from being like a solopreneur through like a small team for a long time, like kind of how's your job changed in the recent times? Like you still managed to go and GitHub, but I'm sure that a lot of other things have changed around you, right?
Yeah, right. So, back when I was solo bootstrapping Laravel, we were notoriously like anti-call. I think I went years without having a single call, like a Zoom meeting, a Google Meet, anything like that. So, to give some context, early 2024, Laravel was roughly a 10-person company. We're now roughly a 70-person company. A lot of that's in engineering, of course, but also design and marketing and sort of business operations. And, to be honest, we have a few more meetings, but my day-to-day is a lot of giving sort of high-level feedback and guidance on the overall product direction, the features we're working on, balancing serving the community and sort of features that serve the mass of Laravel developers versus features that serve just maybe our bigger businesses or customers that are using Laravel. We don't want to isolate any part of the community, right? We don't want to just focus on enterprise use cases and lose sort of the heart of Laravel, which is, originally kind of the indie hacker side project community that I think feels so passionately about Laravel. And then smaller and medium-sized businesses as well. And then, of course, I still spend several hours a day on GitHub just curating the framework. I really see myself as sort of, the final curator of the features that I think belong in the framework. And I try to pick those features that appeal to 80-90% of Laravel users. But, that's kind of a brief summary of what I'm up to. It's a lot of kind of, just giving context and feedback and direction to all of the teams and making sure they can do what they need to do and they're unblocked.
Yeah, so I think that seems to require a fair bit of like foresight and strategic thinking about where things are moving in terms of development in general. And I think this kind of ties in a bit with both things that you've mentioned about previous talks we've had today. So I think Laravel, Octane, and Franken PHP. There's like a question that came up on the Discord as well. It's like, do you see this as kind of a standard future way of installing PHP? Is that kind of where things are going? Or is this just kind of like one thing that's going to coexist with the others? Do you have a feeling about this, like where you would direct resources?
In regards to like Franken PHP and that kind of approach to running PHP?
Yeah.
Yeah, we see it a lot, honestly. It's pretty popular. We have an Octane option on Laravel Cloud. It's definitely used by quite a few people. I like it. I think it's a simpler way, like mental model of running PHP to just like start this application server and not really have like Nginx and FPM necessarily and trying to figure all that out. So to me, I'm a big fan. I hope it continues to gain in popularity. We're actually working with the Franken PHP team a little bit here at Laravel, just sort of collaborating on how we can get the best performance out of Octane and Franken PHP on Laravel Cloud. So, yeah, I would say I'm bullish on that as an overall way of running PHP. And I think anything you can do to make your system faster is always a popular improvement to make, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think simultaneously, the other subject that we already covered a little bit on AI, and I think, I've seen that you've been looking at like what the part of a PHP framework in that context even is. I think, do you have an answer to that at this point? Like, where is this going?
Yeah, at Laravel, there's a few things on our mind, I guess. We want to have a really good AI SDK story so that people that want to integrate with whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini models, they can do that really easily in PHP. There's community efforts around this already, right? AI SDK is written in PHP and even for Laravel. Another thing we're thinking about is, like I said, the models are already really good at writing PHP and Laravel for that matter as well, just because of the history and amount of content that is out there that they're trained on. We're pretty interested in exploring, and this may be an MCP powered thing actually, local coding assistants that are always feeding the models the most up-to-date documentation on Laravel, but also on like peripheral projects to Laravel like Inertia, Livewire, Alpine.js, things like that. And maybe trying to inject a little bit of stylized opinion into how they write Laravel so that, when you have a framework that's 14 years old, sort of conventions change and best practices change from the community and just sort of like the vibe of what people, how they prefer to write Laravel in 2025 might look a little bit different than it did in 2016. And trying to get the models to sort of respect, what do we think is the best way to write Laravel applications? So we're interested in experimenting with that. And we've kind of kicked off some prototype work to see how can we pair you with an MCP server local coding assistant that makes it even better writing Laravel with LLMs and coding agents.
Interesting. A totally different question, Taylor, here. I found this, I don't know, it stood out to me, but someone writes, how would you try to invite Symphony veterans into Laravel? Now, Nicolas is here in the room as well, so I don't know how happy he's about that. But the follow-up question is, what are the strengths that you're proud of that could be appealing to Symphony developers?
It's funny because I've never actually used Symphony as a framework. My experience with Symphony, I've never used any other PHP framework actually, right. or CMS or anything, because I came into PHP so accidentally, right, from .NET, and I didn't have this history of using PHP. Right. But what I will say is that Symphony is like one of the most incredibly well-maintained open source projects probably in the world. Mm-hmm. The Symphony components are incredibly bulletproof. I think we use maybe 8 to 10 Symphony components in Laravel. The biggest, the most popular of which, the one people interact with the most, is probably the HTTP and console components. The HTTP component sort of is the underpinning for our request and response objects in Laravel, and the console component, of course, powers Artisan, which every Laravel developer uses. Mm-hmm. As far as Symphony developers experimenting with Laravel, maybe that would be a point of familiarity to them. They have HTTP Foundation, they have Symphony console sort of available to them. But if you're interested in giving it a shot, there's lots of material out there on Laracast and things like that. But I think PHP is lucky to have two very well maintained and developed frameworks. Some languages never get such a framework. Okay. Right. And we have two that are very stable, mature choices for people to use, which is, we're incredibly lucky to have that in the PHP ecosystem. And then combined, I'd be remiss not to mention Composer and packages itself, right? Which is really the foundation for making almost any of this possible. So I owe an incredible debt of gratitude to Symphony, to Composer, to packages, to all of the foundational work in PHP that was done, that I had nothing to do with.
Oh. Well, thanks, I guess, for the little part that was me there.
Like I said at the beginning, that's the backbone of the modern PHP ecosystem here.
Yeah, but I think that's why I find it so fascinating to also participate in an event like this, just because you see all the different people that are involved in this, and you see the size of this and the different aspects of it, right? And I think that's, in hindsight, that wasn't the reason why I built anything like Composer packages, but that's the cool thing about running this today, is where it's like a part of all of these different ecosystems, and it's really fun and interesting to kind of have a little hand in most of them and kind of see and compare. And I think that the question you asked about what might be interesting to Symphony developers and Laravel kind of goes in this direction of I think there's a lot to be gained from people looking into the other PHP ecosystems tools and kind of seeing how do things work there, and I don't know, not stay just within your own thing. I mean, there's value from that too, because if you have a lot of familiarity with the tool, and I think you just become more effective at it. But I think this leads me a bit to another question that, maybe topic we're going to talk about later too, is education. And I think that's something I'm a bit curious on your perspective on, because my perception is that Laravel is one of the, current few drivers that people really get started with PHP, or why people get started with PHP, and where do you kind of both see your role in this path to getting people to work with PHP and Laravel at the same time, and what do you plan on doing about that? Are there things you plan on working in that direction?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've tried to think about this from a few different angles. One is just getting started with PHP itself, getting the language installed. So we collaborated. Collaborated is probably a strong word. I encouraged Marcel to develop this thing called php.new, which is, if you go to laravel.com/install, or maybe installation, whatever the getting started page is on our documentation, It actually walks you through installing PHP as a self-contained binary, and that comes through the service that Marcel created called php.new. And that binary contains PHP, Composer, and the Laravel installer, and no dependencies. So you don't need like Homebrew or Docker or anything like that. It's just a self-contained thing. And that works across Mac, Windows, and Linux. I think that was so huge. I felt so passionate about that, and I had no ability to build it myself. That's why I had to bug Marcel to please make this happen, and I'm so grateful he did. But I really wanted people to be able to buy a new laptop and run a single command and have PHP and Composer available to them with no other, third-party stuff needed. And so now you can buy a new laptop and have PHP in just a few minutes, and you're up and running, and you can even create Laravel projects. So that I really wanted PHP to be easy to install, and I think that did really well getting that done. Another thing, as far as education goes, we're currently reworking our boot camp. So before our big Laravel 12 release, we had a boot camp. We wanted to rebuild it for some, to reflect how Laravel has changed over the years and your new options, whether it's Inertia, Livewire, or Blade. And so we're retooling that boot camp, but that'll be a really good on-ramp to learning Laravel for new developers. So I'm excited to get that out a little bit later in the summer as well. But education's always been something that's been super passionate, or has been a big passion of mine, just in regards to documentation itself. I always spend a lot of my time on the Laravel documentation, just making sure it's very easy to understand, trying to see everything through a beginner's eyes. When you've been working on a framework for 14 years, it's easy to sort of lose perspective on how the beginner would see the framework. And I remember having that realization when I looked at our installation docs last year, and I was like, this is just way too complicated. Like if I was new to PHP and Laravel and it's recommending I use Docker and set up Sail, and I don't know what any of this means. And that's what was kind of the spark for wanting to have PHP.new, where it was just so much easier to get started. But I'm always passionate about onboarding people onto PHP. I know how it changed my life. I've heard so many stories at Laracons and other conferences about how building things in PHP and in Laravel allowed people to start new careers, to provide for their family, to build their dream side project ideas. So I want people to get started as easily as possible so that they can experience that too.
And speaking about beautiful documentation, this is a question that I've had for years now. But in the early days of Laravel, you had the doc blocks in the code that were indented always was that like manual work? Because
I still do that manually. I can't get an LLM to do that reliably.
No, yeah, exactly. Okay, that's a lot of dedication.
Yeah, I still do it manually, and I've developed like mental tricks, for shortening words, and I know if I do this, I can save 2 characters or gain 1 character. It's just like it's kind of pathological at this point, but I got to keep going now. It's 14 years. Why stop now?
Oh, awesome. Another question we had in Discord here. By the way, Taylor, there are lots of questions, and we won't be able to cover all of them. Yeah, there are a lot. I don't know if you'll have the time, Taylor, to join the Discord server. I know you're pretty busy.
I'll try to pop in there. That's
nice. But this one's I was curious about, because a couple of people asked about it as well. I cannot pronounce it. I'm sorry, but when creating an API with Laravel, it still includes many classes and services for rendering HTML. Like in Laravel, you install the framework, right? How do people have to how do they work around can I say monolith? I think that's not a bad word. I think that's a good thing, actually. Yeah. When they try to create more lightweight API apps, for example, stuff like that, do you have any a vision for that?
I'm so torn on that. I think, we've experimented with that, as you may know, through Lumen, which was kind of a micro version of Laravel that we created. Gosh, I don't know what year that was, but it was maybe, let's just say 2016, 2017 feels about right, maybe. Yeah. And people would use it. I would say it's a fairly popular project. Quite a few people used it. But what we saw a lot of the time is they outgrew it. Yeah. And they were like, okay, now I need to move to Laravel and how do I do that? And, now we could probably automate it, I'm sure, through tools like Rector or other code migration tools. But back then, that didn't exist for PHP. So we kind of sunset that project around the time we came out with Laravel 11 because we minimized the file structure in Laravel itself quite a bit. And I always have that goal to make Laravel simpler and simpler with each release. And honestly, there's more I would have done on Laravel 12, but I just didn't want to scare people and change things around too much. But I've experimented even with the current release of Laravel, a Laravel new -- API flag that kind of generates scaffolds out a new project with some of that stuff removed, like around blade templating or the Vite setup and all of that. That's kind of front end related.
Right.
It actually ends up being not that much stuff that gets removed, which I'm always torn of is this worth releasing just to delete 5 files? And maybe it is just, a psychological benefit to people to have that option and they feel like that's better. So we may do that. I'm open to doing that. It just doesn't do much because there's not a lot to delete. But, maybe we'll do it. People keep asking for it. So we listen to the people,
People keep asking for Lumen as well. It's been a couple of years now, but they really miss it. But if I can pitch in here for a second, I do think the -- API flag is better than having a separate kind of install like Lumen was, because you just you keep everything still a little bit together, right? I think that makes more sense.
Yeah.
I think,
and of course we need to think about there's tools like API Platform now with Laravel support. What do we do with that? Do we have a -- API Platform flag? So there's lots of things we can consider for kind of API first projects, which is a very common way to use Laravel.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think maybe just one last thing that I saw the scroll by that's kind of a bit out there. I think there were a few people asking different types of questions about native PHP. Have you tried this yourself so far? And do you have any thoughts?
I haven't tried it, actually. I mean, I saw the demo at Laracon, as maybe some of you did. Pretty crazy stuff, pretty impressive. They've got that running. So hats off to them. I always encourage crazy ideas. I think Laravel itself was a bit of a crazy idea. A .NET developer who, has the audacity to create a PHP framework. Right. That's crazy. So many good projects come out of crazy ideas. So I'm never one to tell people don't try something. So, I think it's cool. If it unlocks the ability for people to ship either a mobile or Mac desktop menu bar application or something like that, hey, that's awesome. That's something that otherwise would not have existed maybe.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes out of that, what some people come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Taylor, we're out of time. And like I said, there are 100 more questions. So, but it was really good having you here and some very interesting insights as well. So thank you for making the time to attend PHPverse. Yeah. And thank you for being a part of PHP's, a pretty big part actually of PHP's history. So
yeah, thanks very much for making it.
Thanks for having me.